So I mean that's solar thermal, and I mean that has its part to play in renewable energy. Solar photovoltaics now is the thing that people tend to look at more, and it's a different end of the spectrum now, both in terms, both literally and figuratively. And that is where light is being transformed to electricity. I didn't bother to put in the slide with all the physics behind it. It's 99.9% pure silicon, which is doped with boron and phosphorus, if you know your chemistry, to provide electrons and holes which let the electricity flow. But essentially, the photons are what is causing that to happen. And because photons are only available in one small spectrum, a lot of the sunlight that hits the panel is not going to be converted to any other form of energy. Unlike the solar water heater, because you're talking about heat, almost all the rays that come in can be converted. With photovoltaics, it's only going to be a small fraction, because it's only at that one energy, very small energy level, that the light is being converted. So even though there are people that have made panels that can collect light at different frequencies, in general, therefore photovoltaic panels tend to be less efficient than, say, solar thermal, or that we looked at earlier. So that's something to bear in mind. Photovoltaics tend to be at an efficiency of about 10 to 15%, whereas thermal could be up to 60% or so. So these are just things to bear in mind. But the advantage of the photovoltaics is that you've got electricity produced, and that's high grade. We consider that high grade energy, because a lot of times you're looking at renewables to produce electricity. That's what we want. We want something to replace the grid. So this is what makes photovoltaics, in spite of their cost, in spite of their less efficiency, useful, because they produce the product that we want, essentially. So I mean, what I tell people sometimes is that even in an application, you may want to use both, because maybe you have heating needs, you want to use solar thermal for that, and you have an electricity need, you want to use photovoltaics for that. Because what some people do often is say, well, let's have photovoltaics for everything, but maybe if you're heating something, you don't want to transform electricity into heat when you can just have a heat-to-heat transfer. So these are just things to bear in mind. So those are just three. They say what goes up must come down. Photovoltaic satellites is where the technology developed, and then of course we have the solar calculators, although I guess we hardly see those now with iPhones and whatnot. But that's PVs. And one of the things that people look at, not just on top of the houses, is these solar farms, which can then almost be like utility scale solar. Again, I haven't seen too many places in Saba where you can put something like this. So maybe this is not the application for Saba. But just to give you an idea of what is possible, and certainly in a number of Caribbean islands, I'm interested in doing something of this level where you can make use of the economies of scale and do something up to 1 megawatt. That's what 1 megawatt area was for. So PV system is the panel charge control. That's the simple idea, batteries and then inverter. The thing with the solar panels is that they provide DC current, the direct current that you get from a battery. For most of the things that you want to use in your house or in where you live, you're talking about alternative current from the mains, so you need the inverter to be able to make that change. That's a cost in your system, and that's something you have to think about. So it's not just the panels, it's being able to change in that way, and you have to make sure that you don't get overcharging from the panels. The battery is important in the standalone systems because you need that kind of storage. If not, you're only going to be able to get your solar power when it's available, which is not going to be particularly useful if you have something that is a continuous need. You want to be able to use your devices connected to solar whenever you want to, so that's why battery is important. And so when you're talking about solar energy, you have to take into consideration a lot of these, what we call these balance of system components. It's not just the panels. So you have to put that into the cost of your system. Grid-tied systems, which are solar again, which are similar but just don't have the batteries. In this case, what's happening is that when you produce and you're not going to use it for yourself, then the inverter can send that back to the utility, and so you go back and forth. So you use it when it's available. That has the advantage of not having batteries in the system, but again, you only have it as it's available. So again, it depends on what you want to do. This is just in a picture of how it works. So if you want to have this in your home, that's what you have in terms of the battery bank, the AC, and the panels and breakers. I think here, I was told in the marine is where they have a system like this that we're going to see tomorrow, isn't it? So we can look forward to that on the fuel film. And so one of these, this is a normal 250 watt panel. So this gives you an idea of 150 kilowatt hours per month. That's probably a little bit under average of what a household would use. So it gives you an idea as to what panels you need to power what you're going to do. So the panels are not necessarily that expensive, but again, when you factor in the batteries possibly and the inverter and others, you're looking at maybe $10,000 or so in investment. Nowadays, the cost of panels have come down remarkably. So in about 3 to 4 years, you can get your payback. But again, a lot of these things, you need that initial investment. Who's going to do that? You have to look at that. This is going back into the Caribbean. This is just a number of things. I like to sometimes go out and take a drive around this part of research and see what's out there. And this guy is actually in Barbados and talking about informal institutions. He is a mechanic by trade, no formal training in any kind of renewable energy or anything. There's a guy, when I asked him about climate change, he hadn't even heard about it. But he just, as a mechanic and working on a boat, saw these panels, went and put them out himself. And you can even see in the panels there that they're not all the same, because he kind of did it trial and error. And he added a wind turbine as well. But over the years, he's able to have his shop now is completely free of the grid. He's producing everything for himself from those panels. For the whole year, he's not really using Barbados Light and Power. And he even has a side business now where he's charging people's car batteries. As I said, he's a car mechanic. So this is an example. So he's making some commercial value out of it. And this is the informal institution. He hears about it, he goes, he puts things together. And what we found in a lot of the islands is that a lot of renewable energy is actually driven by what a friend of mine likes to call tinkerers, people that do it yourself, people who are just doing it for fun. And sometimes there are people with finances, but sometimes there are people like this guy, his name is Richard Allen, who's just, in a way, an average person. And these are the people that I think we should be tapping to try to make a difference in the region, because people like him, you might imagine if he had training where he could be. Grenada is another country that's done really well with solar energy. This was the first country in the Caribbean. Sol actually was a company which is run by Dirk Burkhardt. He's actually a German, and this is another interesting champion who was able to come in and discuss with government, and they actually were able to get an interconnection agreement whereby you could sell electricity back to the grid. Because this has been a problem in a number of the islands where there's just no policy. You know, we talked earlier about the importance of having policy, government, and so on together. That there's no policy for interconnection. Grenada was the first, and they have now quite a few systems that are in place. I think they're up to 50 or more. Unfortunately, some of those incentives have been cut back recently, but Grenada is a country that we can look at for solar. This is also Barbados too, looking at photovoltaics, where this is Simmons Electrical. They were electrical installers, and they've now decided to go into that company that were called Solar Energy Innovations. Again, what we find in development is that if you have the core capacities, if you have a business where you already have the skills, like to deal with electricity, it may be easier to make the jump over to renewable energy. Because this is often part of the barrier, that you don't have the capacity, you don't have the people trained, you know, that the institution is not there to help you. So this is an example of where innovation occurred. And this is now a guy who went the other way. This this Vincent McLean of Solaris Energy. They were in solar water heaters, and he went and is now moving into photovoltaics. So you can see the innovation is happening there. Harrison's Cave, I always put this again because it's a tourist attraction in Barbados, and they put the solar panels up as a sort of additional environmentally friendly thing to go with the cave. That's one of the trams and the lighting. And again, maybe you might want to think this about a country like Saba and your Sea&Learn. You're pushing environmental aspects. Why not try to have an energy system that goes along with that? That's the cave and the lighting inside. One of the main tourist attractions in Barbados. So you see, a lot of times where we see these projects happening is where there's a win-win. And I know that you've heard this many times before, but if you've got the advantage in one area already, it's in tourism, or you're mixing it with a tourism goal, with an energy goal, an environmental goal, that's what puts the things forward. So that's mainly solar. Wind is another one that I looked at, and I won't go into all those details, but you can also have large or medium or small wind. And this I looked at in the context of the Dutch countries. That was actually Playa Cunha in Curacao, and very windy there that was. You can see I was going up. But this is another champion, another interesting story now, again, innovation within Curacao, and that might be interesting to you guys in terms of the Dutch aspect. This is Carol Tuya, who is the CEO of Aqualectra in Curacao. And he actually studied in Holland environmental aspects, but has been able to get environmental aspects into the utility because of his particular influence. So here we have a champion again. Here we have an informal institution. And what was interesting about what he's been able to do is that, along with promoting things like the wind energy, which led to the formation of New Capital, which is the company now that pushes the wind, basically in the Caribbean, the leading wind company. He also was able to use the desalination that they were used in terms of producing electricity to get bottled water. So again, that was a win-win that he was able to get from that particular development. So it seems a lot of times when we're seeing renewable energy that it is this kind of creative solution to a problem that's happening. Not for someone just putting in a system, but recognizing there can be a benefit in another area. In Jamaica, this is another success story for wind in the Caribbean. That's Raymond Wright, who also died recently a couple of years ago. But he pushed a lot of that, and he was a geologist by profession, not a wind energy expert. But he found that, and he was the head of PCJ, Petroleum Corporation of Jamaica. But because he gained this interest from just going around the country, looking at geological structures and recognizing that it was windy, he actually pushed that, and eventually Petroleum Corporation of Jamaica became the renewable energy developers in Jamaica. So this is a situation where a company not set up for renewables, because of his influence on others, was able to do that. So you're seeing more and more, each time you're looking, it seems as though something other than the formal institution is pushing these projects. Right now, there are 20 megawatts in Jamaica. At Wigton, they're expanding it. They've gotten carbon credits too from the Dutch, where they work with the people in Curacao. So that is a success story that hopefully we can build on. And I know here in Saba there's been talk about wind energy too. So these are examples. You might know more about it than me. I looked a bit at the geothermal in the Caribbean as well, specifically around Nevis, Dominica, and St. Lucia. And it was interesting to look at how the difference in these three countries. St. Lucia had a situation where they are historically in this region in the front runners in geothermal exploration. They have the Soufrière, they have the drive-in volcano. Their development started in the 1950s, but they unfortunately still have not had a project going yet, partly because they had a policy that tied them into a company that they were unable to get out of for a while. So that held them back. And I found that interesting because there's always this idea that policies, formal policies, are what you need. But sometimes they were a little bit too formal and negotiated so strictly that they couldn't get out of it. So sometimes flexibility is better in the case of St. Lucia. I think St. Lucia is going to go ahead now, but certainly up to a few years ago, policy held them back. So you see, policy can push you forward, it can hold you back, depending on how stringent it is. And in this case, it was an exclusive agreement that the government negotiated that was not in their favor. These are the sort of things that sometimes happen in the Caribbean. Nevis, at least up to a few years ago, was moving ahead with West Indies Power. Some of you here will know Carrie McDonald, who was involved in that, who, as I was hearing recently, had a heart attack here a couple of years ago. But Nevis, the interesting thing about Nevis is that Nevis had no policy in place before they started developing. Now that seems, again, when I talk to some of the people within this region, to have been a bit of an advantage to kind of develop your policy as you go, because then you understand the issues as you develop projects. So sometimes playing it as you go can be an advantage, and they're at least a little bit ahead of St. Lucia at the moment. Dominica is an interesting one that's different from both St. Lucia and Nevis, in that their development is being pushed by the French government from Guadeloupe and Martinique, because in that area, the French have an interest because they recognize that Dominica development can supply electricity for Martinique and Guadeloupe, and that can lower the prices of electricity for them. So Dominica, by virtue of its positioning, just its location, and having that international jurisdiction on both ends, may actually be a benefit to them. So it's really interesting in a number of projects to see that often, even as those little countries, that this international influence is important too. And that was one of the things that came forward to me, particularly in the French and the Dutch islands. Not always in the English, but that international aspect is an important part. And that really is where where I came to with this particular model, which I ended up with for the region, where I looked at the fact that the formal and informal institutions, the external to country influence, and also in there, although I think it was also the aspect of champions, which is part of the informal institutions. So that was where I saw the main interactions being, that you need to get this, to get, as it were, the system, the ecosystem. You need to have the international, the local champion, and these informal institutions together. And then came the finances. That the finances tended to come out of the other things. When the environment was right, they tended to, the governments tended to make the finances work. Or maybe the international institutions gave the support that made the finances work. So it's not like the finances were at the beginning, they tended to be at the end. So that, I mean, the thing that came through to me most is that you need that supporting system before you get to the dollars and cents in a way. We often start by looking at the dollars and cents rather than start by looking at what's in the country, how are things structured, what are the government incentives, who are the champions that we have to look at, and what is the nature with external to country influence, which in the Dutch case is maybe things like a country like the Netherlands, but also in organizations like OAS, which push the geothermal project, for example. IDB has been involved a lot in policies in the Caribbean. Often these institutions are important in getting these things to go, and if they understand the situation well, success. If they don't, things tend to fall apart. So that communication, that network, that organization structure is important for it. And coming on from that is really this, which is the business that I am involved in a bit now, which is called Element Renewables Inc., where we're looking to do just that, really. It's kind of trying to take research now into real life, in that this is a company where now I bring the Caribbean aspect of the development to mix with this sort of international Canadian financing, because a lot of times in the Caribbean what's happening is that you don't have the funds. You have good projects, but nobody has the startup financing. In Canada, often people have the financing, but they don't know anything about the Caribbean, except there's a place up there that has some beaches and so on. They don't know the market, so they don't know. They always think of it as a risky development. So the only thing that you can do to really make that, to reduce that risk, is to go in there and really try to understand the system. So that's what I'm hoping for the future now, after I finish this doctoral work, where we'll be able to be involved in the Caribbean and hopefully Saba as well in making something happen. So that's really what my presentation was today. I wanted to end with Saba again. I'm now looking at it. Perhaps, I don't know how much time we have to talk, and maybe in the next few days, about the geothermal, wind and solar on Saba. You know, being a small country, the distributed generation looks possible from the perspective that you do have the terrain that makes it a little harder to get from the different villages. Perhaps that speaks to the possibility of more distributed generation to take away from that problem. But again, sometimes it's harder to diversify a small grid, because if you have a small amount of electricity to start with, to tear that up now into smaller portions, are you going to get the economy of scale of having a big one? I mean, it's not going to push your costs up. These are things you have to look at. Because often in the Caribbean, or in general in electricity, we look at diversification as being good for reducing vulnerability, because you don't want to have all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. But those are the kind of discussions that perhaps people here will have to be taken seriously. I know that some of that has gone on already, but perhaps that's more that we can talk about. And perhaps again to the relationship with Nevis, I mean it's the Netherlands, why do I believe this in mind, I don't know. Important one for Saba now, perhaps, to get that international support. I don't know about champions within Nevis, the individual that also can make it happen, but I think there are a number of champions certainly within Sea&Learn, so if that speaks to the rest of the country, I would think that that's also a big part of pushing things along. So that's really what I had for today. I'm not sure how we did for time. So I think it's only now for questions or anything that you thought that you want to talk about. Thank you so much for being so attentive.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get it. That's what hello? Yeah? So, does anybody have questions? Thank you very much.
You're standing in front of the speaker, that's impossible.
Steve has a question.
Sorry, yes,
I live in the British Virgin Islands, and we too are bound by a contractual agreement between the government and our local provider for electricity to not allow any sort of a renewable energy program. Besides St. Lucia, are there any other islands in the Caribbean that are bound by contract, and have they successfully been able to work their way out of these contracts to start to provide renewable energy for the island?
St. Lucia is the one that I know about, but I could say that I think for the rest of the Caribbean, what they're trying to do in the future is that this CARICOM is trying to put this sort of policy template that will sort of guide these kind of things in the future. I don't know in terms of what you're saying, getting out of something that is now, I don't know, maybe because BVI with the relationship with Britain, whether that would make it more complicated, or if it's just a matter of negotiation or trying to find a way out of it. Eventually, I think, in St. Lucia, the government changed, and that perhaps made a difference as well. But I think that's the one that I know about. I don't know if anyone knows about others where that kind of negotiation had to happen or had to be changed. I know Jamaica, for example, had to change their their situation with the wind, because at the beginning, what happened was that the guy Raymond Wright, he decided, look, I want wind so badly that even though it's not economic for me, they were paying, for example, for transmission costs and all that they really shouldn't have, but they wanted to get it off the ground. And then they had to renegotiate the price like years after in order to just keep the company going, and eventually they were able to do that. But sometimes it has people who just kind of bite the bullet because they figure, well, let's get something going. And they don't look far enough. Maybe sometimes you're just unlucky, but that's just something you need to pay in mind. But, yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Whenever you mention, or anyone mentions any kind of solar energy project here on the island, either for hot water or PV, first thing they say, no, it's nothing for an island like this, because especially because of the hurricane, everything will disappear. Yeah. I've heard it so many times. I'm still going to do it, but anyhow. Yeah. What is the experience on the other islands in the Caribbean, because they're in the same situation?
But I haven't, well, Barbados has not really had a hurricane recently, but as far as the other islands are concerned, from what I hear, that there's been no sort of worse fearing of the equipment than anything else, if you understand what I mean. That if your roof goes, well, I guess the roof goes and the solar water heater goes with it, but it's not as if the solar water heater is any more vulnerable than the rest of the house or whatever they have, because the companies I've talked to that have had installations in the Grenadiers and other parts of the Caribbean have had hurricanes. That's what they have said, and the same thing with PV. Also with wind, well, you didn't mention wind, but in Jamaica, in fact, said that they had even just after they put the wind turbines up, and they actually had no problem. So that was a great test for them that they stood. So I haven't really found, although I know that that has been a concern that has been raised in countries also like Bahamas, but I don't know of any such situations where the hurricane has destroyed the system any more than it would, so say, the great being down. And at least having distributed generation, perhaps we would hope that even if some part of it goes down, there's more chance that you have something remaining than if you have, say, for example, one centralized generator, something goes with that, that's it. So I suppose, I mean, it is a concern, but I think a lot of the times the benefits, certainly I think the solar water heaters, and I think to some extent with PV, that the benefits do outweigh the risk once you've got the finances right. But it is a concern. But that's what I've heard from people who have had that experience. Yes,
one principal question about the different types of alternative energy. In my view, I heard it confirmed many times, if you're using wind energy or solar energy, you need a traditional backup system in case there's no sun or there's no wind. How is that with the geothermal energy? For I have the feeling that you don't need such a backup system then.
Well, yeah, geothermal is a bit different. Again, we didn't get to go into this in the presentation, but some of those, you know, that graph I had, I talked about centralized versus decentralized and so on, doesn't quite work with geothermal, because geothermal is almost like a bit between conventional and renewable from the perspective of the infrastructure that you have to put up. And from that perspective, a lot of times with geothermal can be the only. I mean, because the other thing with geothermal is that it's such huge, unlike solar wind where you can it's much more difficult to get a megawatt. You've got a 1 megawatt in time, wind turbine is a pretty big one, pretty huge one. And to get 1 megawatt in solar is needs acres of land. In geothermal, I mean in Nevis, they've had estimations of 400 megawatts of capacity just in Nevis. So when you look at that, I'm sure that Saba, although I don't know the numbers here, I'm assuming that it's probably something of that in that region, in which case that can easily provide Saba's electricity without even sort of blinking an eyelid, and it's consistent, you know, it's not like the sort of fluctuation of wind and solar. And solar is a bit different. It's just that the barriers to geothermal are that initial construction cost, and then also having enough market as well, because you want to be able to use that resource, and if people are not going to be taking the resource, then the economics don't always work out. So that is, it's like more negotiating, more agreement. So it's like, it's on the other end of the scale of something like solar thermal, where you can just build a solar cooker or whatever. But yes, the answer to your question, I would think yes, you can. The need for backup would not necessarily be so much there, except for just vulnerability aspects that you may want in case the geothermal is down or something is down for the time. You might want to have something just in case, a sort of pure duplication. But in general, I am with you. I think that can go as 100%.
Just one question. Is that
You have one more? Yeah.
Well, I'm interested in geothermal because I understand two things. One is it's extremely expensive, like you were saying, to start it up.
Yeah.
You need to invest millions, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, what about like earthquake risks and things like that?
Yeah, first to talk about the earthquake risk as well.
Because is there in the Caribbean any plant which is producing energy right now, geothermal?
Not right now, but they've done a number of studies. As the OS did this GeoCaribe studies that was done with Nevis to Dominica. As I said, that was through that I actually heard of a plan with Saba, and part of that was looking at the earthquake risk. I mean, that was part of it. Again, I can really speak so specifically to it, but I think they have. Again, I can only go from what the study said. That it is something that I think that they can work around, but yeah, I mean it is an issue. I mean the places in the world where you can get geothermal energy invariably are the places in the world that you can get earthquakes, because the same geological formation that is going to give you geothermal energy is also going to have that instability for earthquakes. So it's something that people will always have in the front of their mind. But nonetheless, I mean, the volumes of energy, the capacity of energy that the geothermal can produce is just so amazingly high that if that did come on stream in the Caribbean, it could completely change the whole dynamics of energy in the region. With Trinidad not having the same sort of position as the sort of provider as it has now, it could change even the politics. I mean, it's amazing to think of industries could go different places. I mean, it's kind of almost mind-boggling to think what could happen. Again, it's a lot to put together if geothermal really did come on stream, but it's certainly fascinating to think about. Yes, hope if nothing else that it would have got you thinking about this complicated. I'm sure, I'm sorry, there's no easy answers to say, well, A, B, and C is what you must do, but the only thing you can do is keep thinking and keep trying to be creative and innovative in our solutions, especially in a small island like Saba. So, I don't know. If there's no more, thank you, I enjoyed it, and pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much, David. We would like to thank Scout Space for hosting this event today. So there is a special menu today, and the next couple of days there will be a lot of nice activities. Tomorrow with David, you can join him on his field trip We first have a hands-on activity with the solar cooker actually, and then following that we will continue to go to Fort Bay. And then on Monday we've got our sharks and rays expert that will be at Eco Lodge, and the day after we have a field trip with him. On Wednesday we will have a scorpions and spiders expert called Lauren Esposito having a presentation at Queen's Gardens, and she will have a field trip on Thursday during the night. So we have a night hike, and we will look for spiders and scorpions on Saba. Well, if you want to participate in these activities, please go to sea&learn.org, and thank you very much for coming, and thank you, David, for talking to me.
Well, thank you.